morning, everyone. Thank you for being here with us today. We are really excited to be with you. There may be some others joining us, but because we are being recorded and video streamed, we definitely want to start on time for the folks that are tuning in, and also for you to honor the time that you're here. So I'll introduce myself first. My name is Neva Bandelow, and I'm the Early Learning Program Manager at the Alameda County Office of Education. And this is my colleague and friend.
My name is LaWanda Wesley, and I am with Oakland Unified School District, and I am the Director of Quality Enhancement and Professional Development.
Great. So we're here today to talk about equity and give you an idea of a project that we worked on together for 18 months. And so we'll have some interactive activities for you. And as we get further into today's session, if we're still spread out and only a couple at each table, we'll ask you to move together for some of the activities, okay? All right, go ahead.
Okay. So, yes, Neva and I had the pleasure of coming together to design and co-design an equity leadership project together, and so we're bringing this training and this workshop to you. And the outcomes for today, as you can see here, is really to deepen your understanding about what equity is and leadership and relationships and how that connects to child outcomes, student outcomes, but we're looking at the intersectionality of those areas. And then we also want to help you understand and define equity, because equity can be defined in many different ways in different contexts. So we'll help give you a sense of what equity means for us and how we applied it to our work. And then also have you look at your own equity lens and what that looks like. And we'll have some interactive activities that will help us deepen that understanding. And then also take you on a journey of an 18-month project that we designed, a fellowship. Again, we intersected our work because we were at the same agency, and we haven't been the same since the fellowship. So we're going to take you on the journey of what that was for us. At the same time, help you think about how this work could be applied to your own community context, because we did it to our own, and help you make that connection. And then hopefully you'll walk away with an action plan, and we have some tools to help you think about action plan, and again, taking that back to your own community context. Yes, yes.
Those action plans are on your tabletop right now.
So on your, where I said, don't touch it, now you can turn it over. If you're not, you're not here, let's get you one. There you go, because you're solo. So what you'll see on the action plan as we go through our time together, what we have here is what we call a living document for capturing big ideas, thinking about your goals, strategies, intended outcomes. And then sometimes when I walk away from going to a conference, I'm still curious about some things. So they address many, concepts and topics that was related to the workshop, but what am I still leaving curious about? And in this sense, thinking about inclusion and equity. So I'm going to ask a member to read this quote in just a bit that's here today. This quote was found in a leadership book from someone in my local area in Sacramento who just authored a book, Scott Hagan. And so as keeping your equity lens on and your inclusion lens on, if someone would please be so kind to read the quote that's up there. Out loud. Okay, thank you. Scott Hagan. Just sit with that for a little bit. I'm going to ask one more volunteer to read it one more time.
Momentum doesn't require something monumental. Approach your next inch with passion and you'll be mine.
Yeah. So what's coming up for you when you think about that as it relates to equity and inclusion? Anybody? Yeah.
And we have so far to go in our district, and I just like the next inch.
Exactly. Like
but do your best within that next inch, but with passion.
That's exactly it. And doing this work, even when Neva and I set out to do it, it seems like such a big task. But when you start to go narrow and say, where do I have locus of control? Where can I make a difference? And where can I be very specific? And you say the world of inclusion and equity is this big, but the project or the efforts or the initiative I'm going to take on can be this. within that whole scope. So that's what we're going to take you on a journey. Yeah.
So we're going to have you take a second out, a couple seconds out to think about the word equity. And I'll go ahead and let you know what you'll be doing, and then I'm going to ask you to move a bit, some of you to move. So I want you first just solely to think about what the word equity means to you. And then you may even want to write it down. And then think about how does that word equity differ from the word equality. Again, this is just individually. And then once you have some time, I'll give you some time, I'll kind of pulse where you're at. We're going to break into partners, and you're going to share your definition. So that means those of you that are sitting close to someone, you'll want to get up and move and sit close to someone. So take just a couple minutes to go ahead and do that.
That's great.
All right, and now that you've had a moment to think about those two words and their meanings, please find someone that you can talk with and partner and discuss both of those words and definitions to you. Thanks for moving.
Thank you.
And introduce yourselves if you don't know each other. Take about another minute. Okay, and then just finish up your sentence where you might be. And now I'd like to draw your attention to the screen, and you cannot see this document. Technical assistance. Let's see. Hold on just a second.
So we're trying to mirror a document.
The link's not mirroring.
And you can continue to talk while we
Yeah.
work through our technical difficulties.
So the link to a JPEG?
Mirror.
Yeah, and it's up here, but it's not showing on the screen.
Yep. Yep. Perfect. Yep. Thank you. So now that we have our image up here, Neva's going to lead you through the next part.
Take a look at the, well, all of you take a look at the first image, but then would someone read the descriptor that's under that image out loud?
And if you can't see it, I'll read the
Okay,
first image
thank
for
you,
you.
LaWanda.
You're welcome. In the first image, it is assumed that everyone will benefit from the same supports. They are being treated equally. Again, in the first image, it is assumed that everyone will benefit from the same supports. They are being treated equally.
Second image.
And then the second image. Individuals are given different supports to make it possible for them to have equal access to the game. They are being treated equitably. One more time. Individuals are given different supports to make it possible for them to have equal access to the game. Again, they are being treated equitably. The last image. All three can see the game without any supports or accommodations because the cause of the inequity was addressed. The systemic barrier has been removed. You're welcome.
So if you think about what you just shared with your partners and your own reflective piece of what the difference is from equality and equity and then justice as well, systemic barriers, just to yourselves, you don't have to answer out loud, do you recognize commonality in how you defined it? And that's what we're really looking at today. We're looking at equity and how do we lift up leadership with regards to equity.
Mm-hmm.
So bear with me 1 second as I toggle back for this slide. Okay. And dismiss these things that are coming out. All right, no, hold on, it's not toggling. And it kicked me off. Just 1 second, thank you. Okay, there we go.
All right.
So the way that this project began, it is true, as LaWanda said, we both came to an agency together. And I was really happy and excited to be selected as a fellow in the Bill of National Equity Leaders Action Network. And part of that work as a 3-year fellow was to think about inequity and children 0 to 5 and to work on a project that would really benefit our community and impact the injustices that we see for student outcomes for children 0 to 5, which in this case, we were looking at racial inequity. And so in Alameda County, what we know is that while there is a great variety of aids and assistance in a classroom that matches the populations that we serve, which are very diverse in Alameda County, as I'm sure they are here. Mm-hmm. When we looked at the leadership and decision makers, we did not see a match. What we saw was mostly white women in a leadership role. Mm-hmm. And so that was a concern to me, and it really helped me to think about what would we do to raise leadership so that it would be equitable and match the communities that we serve. And we'll talk about the implications of not having that happen. Mm-hmm. And then LaWanda, please describe your.
I will, and you have a sign on here. So when I met Neva coming to Alameda County, I was just finishing up my dissertation, and my topic was the preparedness of African American leaders to build quality preschool programs. And so Neva and I, like I say, we're sisters from another mister. We are social justice queens together, and we started talking about why is it, like she said, that as you move up the tier in terms of leadership, stratification, that it's more white, even though the teachers and the children are predominantly those of color, when you start really thinking about publicly funded programs. And was curious about that, and there's no answer. We couldn't figure out what the answer was to that. So this journey caused us to think, well, there's a gap in leadership. There's a gap in leadership of those of color. And what do we do to solve that gap? And because she was a esteemed member of the ELAN project, we were able to take the time to try to co-design around that. So.
Great, and so we developed an 18-month project, and it was the Emerging Leaders for Racial Equity. And LaWanda's going to walk you through some of the process and the planning, and you'll hear about that project together, and then you'll have some time to ask questions, and we'll continue the discussion.
All right. So when we started really thinking about putting this all together, we realized we couldn't do it just with the two of us. So we also wanted to make sure whatever we designed also included certain skill sets. So developing leadership, looking at administrative skills, and making sure the project we designed had an equity lens focus. We then said, let's get our infrastructure team together. So we looked at leaders in Alameda County that have expertise or knowledge from all walks of life. Well, that's in early education in that sense. And so they helped us to design and think about what that could look like. So based on their perspectives, based on some of them being researchers at the college, some of them had taught at the community college, we had other folks who were practitioners, we had those who were program level people, systems level thinkers, and supporters of this work around equity and leadership. And so what we ended up, after sitting with each other a few times, was designing an 18-month project. So we went from like, should this be 3 months? Should this be 6 months? No, let's make it 12. And as we really started getting focused on the actual content, we realized we couldn't rush this through. We also had to think about when we would offer this during the week. Is it a Wednesday night? Is it for 2 hours? Is it a Friday when everyone, is just transitioning, they're not in the middle of their work week? What we landed on is having these sessions on Saturdays on a monthly basis. We also decided not only would we have just the fellows themselves, but we wanted them to have mentors. So we paired them up with mentors. So those mentors initially were going to just come every other month, and making sure that these mentees would have this time, or these fellows have their time with themselves and with the content and the deep topics that we're covering around social justice and racial equity. And so forth. But what happened was, and we'll talk a little bit later, is that the mentors decided to join, except one, every month with the mentees. It was amazing. So they came along with they joined us on that journey. And when Neva and I were trying to back it up and think about, well, how do we get the folks to come and apply to this? How will they learn about it? How do we design this application? And what we have in front of you, for those who I put the applications on the table, you can flip it over now, because yay, you have this amazing application that has a lot of depth and of information about how we co-designed around it, the data that we decided to include to help really raise the bar about what is happening. So instead of me like completely walking you through it, you're gonna walk through the application, but I will really quickly help you look at the front page. You'll see we ask who should apply. You'll see the second half of that first page indicates an overview of what institutional systems are. If you turn over, you'll see on the back page our data points. We talked about the fellowship commitment on that page, what this really means, what it means to, if you're coming to these particular sessions, on and on and on with the dates, and then application requirements and so forth. So what we would like to have you do, Neva and I have lived with this document and sat with it for a while, but we'll like to have you walk through the document. So I'm gonna give you a prompt. You may want to write this down, and I'll repeat it so you can use it as you go through this application. We'd like for you to look at one word in this document that really resonates for you. Look at one phrase. So maybe it's not a whole sentence, but just a phrase that stands out for you in this document. And then lastly, look at one sentence that stands out for you in this document. So one word, one phrase, one sentence that stands out for you in this document. And you're going to do that alone. And then after you do that alone, I'll signal to you, and I'll do another prompt, so we'll go on with the next part of the activity. Okay? And I'll give you about 5 to 7 minutes to do that. So feel free to somewhat take your time, but you have 5 to 7 minutes. Thank you.
Check it.
But you only
2 minutes. One more minute. So now I'm going to have you turn to your same partners at your table and just think about the one word, the one phrase, the one sentence that you highlighted or underlined, and think about what is really exciting for you. What is really exciting? Where do you have any concerns or questions? But just talk with your partner freely, and I'll give you about 5 minutes for that, and then we'll come back together. And again, anything that's exciting, questions that you have, or thoughts that are coming up for you. Okay, one more minute. Okay. I hear lively conversations, even though you guys are quiet, but they're very, very lively. I can see your body language. I see hands moving, heads nodding. So, what were some of the highlights that came from your table conversations? And just feel free just to share out what was coming up for you, or for both of you at each table.
We talked about the word aware. We talked about how one can be aware, but that doesn't mean that there's going to be any action behind it. Because maybe you being aware of something also means that you're aware how much it benefits you not to take action.
That's true.
Right.
So awareness doesn't lead to change.
Right.
Excellent.
Yeah, and you might realize that you are privileged, but if I start raising awareness, then your position in the work is different, and that may not make you advantageous any longer. Yeah.
You might feel like it's challenging you or
Yes. And then being challenged can sometimes feel uncomfortable, discomfort. Yeah. What else? That's great. Thank you for sharing. Yes.
So Michelle and I were kind of talking about how she's from a really small school district.
Uh-huh.
And so principal is similar. I mean, equity and equality, I think, and what districts receive and how hard they have to work sometimes just to get training.
Right, right. And coming from a smaller school district assume less people and the resources that you're being given, which you think is great, but then what does it take to?
And smaller does not mean it's easier.
That's right.
Sometimes it's hard.
That sometimes is harder. Yes. I can see where it's harder for smaller and sometimes harder for really large school districts. Yeah. That's great. Great point. Anyone else who want to share?
Any concerns?
Yeah. Yes.
Well, I don't know if it's a concern, but like the word that I talk about is desire, because I do think you have to have a strong passion and desire to do this kind of work at this level.
Yes.
But I also am wondering how many participants would be inclined to participate who are not experiencing racial inequality.
Right.
So that would be my concern, because I think you need both persons in the room to actually make change.
I just want to pay you for that one. Yes. When Neva and I were talking about this, the same thing came up for us, and we did come to the conclusion that we needed both. So if I'm a person of color, emerging leader of color in early education, working on this, getting deeply seated, I go back to my agency, feeling a lot stronger about what I know, taking action, really deconstructing policy. I'm by myself in this work, and I don't even have someone from a sister agency to go to, because I went through this very amazing program that really raised my sense of consciousness about race, equity, and injustices, and thinking about ways to build alliances and everything around, and disrupting implicit bias and all of this good stuff. And then I'm by myself, and so we did deliberately make sure that this wasn't just for those who are of color, that there were other alliances for those who happen to be white that also was a part of this fellowship.
And quite honestly, as a person who is white, it was very important to draw attention to what I have not experienced in my life. So how do we learn from one another, right? And by having a diverse group of fellows, we really heard from each other. So as co-facilitators and planners of this, I will speak for myself, but I know I can speak for LaWanda as well. We learned as much from the participants telling their stories, and perhaps my white allies as well learned even more, because if you don't live it, but at least you're hearing the stories and seeing the systemic racism that is the history of the United States, you start to awaken and understand that you cannot be silent anymore. It's a really good question.
Yeah, and that's Neva's right on. And even though I myself identify as being African American, there were other fellows that came into our program who were Afrocentric, but from other countries. And again, you know, no group has a monolithic experience, right? So we don't say all Spanish-speaking folks are of one ethnicity or culture. They can be from Spain, they can be from Colombia, they can be from Cuba, and they have, so there's a range. And so even that was awakening for me. Yeah.
Good questions.
Any questions?
Well, are we still with one single word?
You could just share
Yeah,
out
you can just
organically.
share out.
You are following directions. No, you can just speak. Permission to speak freely. Yes.
Because it draws into the one word that I had circled as training. I did that from the standpoint of what you were just saying. is
Right.
That you can't assume that everyone comes from the same value set.
Right.
Actually, I will say it, I said, it's just like I know how to drive, she knows how to drive. Now, how we learn how to drive may be totally different. We're on the
Exactly.
road together and you're saying, so where did they get their
That's right.
So there has to be some set of expectations and standards that everyone is moving toward or not. And where it says the project is grounded in the concepts of racial equity, social justice, values, identification, and training relevant to 21st century leadership and practice. And I think that's a key paragraph or sentence.
Yes.
Because you have to have some sense of standardization there and recognize that everyone's not coming from the same place.
That's exactly it. And Neva and I, we'll talk about this later, but we had planned out all the content and the sessions for it. And because of that because we were learning as we were moving through, and we realized some things we had to make adaptations because we had to get a common understanding and grounding. And we found out really quick one session wasn't going to be enough to do that. That wasn't going to be sufficient. So you're making a very good point. Yeah. All right, so what we decided in our context is that we wanted to find out if what we were setting out to do, the design of this 18-month fellowship program around emerging leaders for racial equity and early education with 21st century concepts, embedding these deep principles around social justice was going to make a difference. And so, like I have already started to say, is that we realized we had to change our rate of progression in terms of content and slow down, go deep instead of just going fast and being broad, if that makes any sense. We also made sure there was mentors in the room. So just because Neva and I were doing this together, we had each other, but we felt like the fellows were also going to need those same mentors to provide support, those who had been in the ground and in the field for years. So,
I'm sorry.
Yes.
And part of the mentor's role, the vision of that was that as these are emerging leaders who have been passed over for leadership jobs, not only did we really want to look at systemic racism, inequity, hear their experiences, but we wanted them to learn that practical skills that you need to run an early childhood program, not to take the place of college coursework, but to really have that hands-on experience with writing policies, budget. And what happened from that was that the mentors were expected to come every other time. Once they were participating, all but one came every single month, and the other one wanted to, but she had some home, responsibilities.
Right.
So it became a journey of mentors and the fellows together. The mentors became fellows as well.
Yeah, and part of that was thinking about, I don't know, Neva, I thought about my own experience when I moved from being a teacher to an administrator, and the transference of skill set don't always transfer into leadership skills. So I might have been I was definitely a great teacher and tried to do my best work. And then someone said, "Hey, LaWanda, we think you should be a director," and so I made that transition, but there was no guidance or support. So I had to learn, like many of us, I had to learn on my own. But what if I had a mentor? What if Neva had a mentor? Would that have looked differently for us? So,
You know, one thing I was gonna say about that, and especially in preschool,
yeah,
the rules and regulations, governmental kind of overseeing is just very, and I think even seasoned administrators, I found that out.
right.
It's a whole new ballgame, and people don't quite realize that, so it's the expectation that someone who's been in a parent role for a number of years, that they can just step into that.
Right.
Exactly.
It's just, so I can see why those
Y-
managers want to come along.
Exactly.
Hearing what was, happening.
Yes, and then being emerging leaders of color, them already having some of the microaggressions that happen in our macro society, and then you come in and don't feel like you feel confident enough to do the administrative skill set that Neva was saying, that on top of everything else, you just start questioning yourself. You start doubting yourself and saying, am I the best person for this role? Well, yes, if you get mentor support and you have someone that is right there by your side, yes, you can be successful. So the one piece of our fellowship that we thought was critical and important is that they have projects. So not just go through this content, month after month on the Saturday, but that they actually have projects that were meaningful to them, that was deeply seated in the very thing that we were trying to deconstruct, is looking at policies and practices, and also looking at their relationship with their colleagues back in their workplace, and making sure that they're applying that, but then thinking about how does that look if we were to actually have a project that we're leading, and doing it in our workplace or in our community as it relates to early education, as it relates to getting to child outcomes. So some of the projects that came up, for some of them they chose on their own, was a family engagement project, and really deconstructing the policies and like the parent handbook, and then how do we strengthen family engagement relationships. Some met with the board of supervisors to develop a healthy program. Another one explored field trip and equity. Get that one, field trip and equity? I was like, what is that all about? So there was field trip and equity in her workplace, and she says, I want to champion that, and I feel like the policies and the practices that exist for a number of years were not okay, and I would like to use this work and the lens that I'm gaining in this fellowship to work through that. And then one of the other ones was looking at trauma-informed practices, and how do we bring that work if we're having a social justice lens, and we realize some communities of colors are just riveted with high exposure of trauma. All of us may have experienced trauma, but we know that communities of color may experience it at a higher level. So they went on to have a project around that. So, and there's many more projects, but they, again, not only did the fellows do it, but the mentors also did their own projects or paired up with a fellow to do a collaborative project. So Neva is going to take you through an amazing exploration around implicit bias, which was also deeply seated in our work.
So LaWanda has spoken a bit and landed on implicit bias and what that might mean. This video is what I think a powerful video, because it helps us to think that we all have biases. And so we're going to it's about 7 minutes long, but I think it's so valuable in really contributing to our own development and our own thinking. And hopefully it will mirror. Let's see. No. Okay, hold for me. I'm just going to do something. Copy.
So what I would, while we were getting our technical assistance, I want to just invite you, if you're having any big ideas, concepts that are coming up on your implementation plan that we provided for you, if you would like to just capture things that are coming up for you so far, because sometimes we lose fresh thinking that's coming up, but are you thinking about some big ideas? Are there some goals, some strategies? Just looking at the application itself. And what would that look like in your context? One of the things we did is also decide what type of documentation. We did focus groups to collect documentation. We used their journals to collect information from them. And all of this helped us evaluate the effectiveness of this fellowship. So, and we have the video. Here we go.
Here we go. Volume.
And we don't have volume. Let's see.
Sorry. I don't know why there's no volume. Over there? Okay, let's see. Did you get it, LaWanda?
No.
It's what?
Okay.
I don't know. It didn't work. Sorry. I don't know. Yeah,
Is your volume up on the computer?
it is. Let me try again.
No, pero click on the sound right there.
Oh, the mute button.
Oh, and
Okay.
here, like this.
Yes.
Yay. Look at it. See, it takes a village. Mm-mm. It's not working. Yes, I would love for you to try it. Thank you.
And if you want to go back to capturing big ideas, go for it.
I don't know why. I wonder if I can use your microphone. Will they feed off each other though? Can I try? All right. Well, I will skip this, obviously, since you can't hear it, but what you might want to do is look at the hidden prejudice from the scientific American frontiers. It's a very good video. It talks about an implicit bias test, and there's a link on the PowerPoint, which you all have access to, for both the video and for taking the test yourself. Now, when we think about equity, and in our case, our project was specific around racial equity, but think about different inequity. It might be around gender. It might be, think of the isms, ableism, sexism. You're able to go online and take a test for yourself. Now, there is a human subjects kind of waiver that you would want to do if you want to take the test. They don't really share the information with others, only for their own research, but it's incredible. And this particular video, Alameda is talking first about how he's really stands up strong. He's an advocate for women's rights. And the researcher who developed this test has him take it. And it shows clearly, you'll see, but it shows that he does, even though he acts differently in public and he believes it deep down inside, there's some implicit bias. So what do we do with that? Well, it's more about being aware, not shaming yourself for having it, but being aware and fighting and advocating against it. And then it actually shows another part where he and another person who are also researchers developing these different tests take the test. They design the test and they still show implicit bias because it lives within all of us. So again, the idea from this is just to become aware of what we do have and then work to counteract our biases. And one little test that I did when I was, I think in my bachelor's program when we were looking at equity issues, and the instructor told me, or all of us really, not just me, wherever you're walking, if you're at a mall, if you're out in public somewhere, pay attention to who you make eye contact with and say hello, and who you might not, who you just pass or even walk across the street for. It's quite eye-opening, and that's just a start to help you become more aware of implicit bias.
Yeah, another similar one is if you walk on the same sidewalk, and when you're walking, it's a narrow sidewalk, and you kind of see who yields to like move over and who doesn't. It's an interesting test, and they do there's a sidewalk test that talks about who feels their privilege and who also feel like they're not. And sometimes you say, oh, it's just good old-fashioned kindness, but the sidewalk test have shown over and over again that even just walking down the street, about looking at who yields and who doesn't tells a lot. So
great, thank you. So hopefully we're going to be able to show another important piece. When we were going through this process with our fellows, we were very fortunate to have some very, very, very dynamic guest speakers who have some deep experiences with presenting on racial equity and thinking about our workforce. And we actually had some focus groups that took place. And there's a video that I'm really hoping LaWanda and I can show you about the experiences of the workforce. And this came from, I don't know if you have here the sequel study, if you're aware of it. It comes out of Berkeley, if you're aware of the research Marcy Whitebrook and Leah Austin do. They, in Alameda County, we commissioned a study to show and discuss workforce conditions for teachers. So teachers filled it out. And the results came in, and then we had someone, George Phillip, come in and help lead focus groups on whether or not the experiences of our fellows match what the evidence was showing. And so we have one video that can actually highlight that person's experience.
All right, we're gonna try it, and then we might have tech support, or? Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll try it first.
Oh, why? It shouldn't be on here like this. Let's see. Okay, let's see. No, you're not seeing it again. Okay. So I see it on my screen, but it's not mirroring again. I know I have to put my PowerPoint down, but we're still not hearing it. So PowerPoint. No, it's a video as well. So last time I just ended the show and brought the slides up, which seems to work, but what doesn't work is the audio.
Oh, there you go.
So when I hit audio, it doesn't come through. Thank you.
So as we're working on tech support, what's coming up for you? Just thinking about like implicit bias. Yeah.
I'm thinking about the sidewalk curves, and then thinking about walking on the sidewalk. But I'm also thinking about like sometimes like cultural respect that was been taught might look like a bias.
Yeah.
For example, like if
With
I don't
everything that I
move to the side for like a pregnant woman or an elderly person or someone who might have a disability, then I would be like, I would feel terrible.
Yeah.
Right?
It's gonna
So
work.
then, like, that's not, my reaction is based off of respect.
Yes, yes, yes.
So like sometimes.
Yeah, there's other interplay in there, most definitely. The study I talked about, they did it over and over again, and you'll see where it comes. But yes, there's other nuances, definitely, like respect and children and all sorts of things. Okay, so this is a video of one of our fellows
where I see the
talking
problem.
about
I am willing to give my 100% because I love my job. I love the families that I serve, but the money that I make is not consistent with everything that I have to do, with the quality of teacher that I'm supposed to be. I'm here with my heart to serve my families, but I'm always struggling month to month to pay my rent, to have the proper food for my kids, to be able to take a trip to visit my family back home. I can't go on vacation to go see my family back home because my salary doesn't allow me to do that. So it's very difficult because I love my job. I love the fact that being an immigrant coming from another country, that I'm able to be their voice, the family's voice, because I already went through what they went through. And I can help them, and I see that I'm a source where I can provide for them the light. Let's do it this way. Let's help your child this way. This is the agency that you go if you want to get a driver's license. I provide so much, but I don't get in return what I need for my family, for my 2 kids. Mm-hmm. But I will still continue to be the best that I can for my families and help my community because that's what I'm here for and that's what I love to do.
So there's so much power in her video right here and her voice, not only thinking about work conditions that really were what we were targeting, people of color who have to work several different jobs. And I know it's not just people of color that do that. It is early education, but there is systemic racism. And then the families in which she serves, they need supports because they are experiencing injustice and inequity. And so it's a vicious circle that we need to address. And our work that we were doing is, yes, it's addressing our county and our local area, but then you'll hear a little bit about how that is advancing, and we have to start somewhere. So this is where we are starting. I don't know how you feel about, would you like to try to see the implicit bias video?
I think so.
Okay,
Yes,
let's
it's a
try
good
to
one.
do that.
Yeah.
So give me a moment,
As
go
she's
ahead.
doing that, what we found in the sequel study that looked at workforce conditions, there was 2 top areas that teachers who are on the ground concerned about as they're doing this work. One, that they have enough money to pay for food and put food on the table. The second area they're worried about is shelter. They don't have shelter, and was over 50% of them were receiving government assistance of some sort, whether that was CalFresh, public housing, Medi-Cal, a combination of them. So these are our teachers who are working with our children.
Behind every innovation is an inspired.
Go ahead.
Working with our children, trying to do their best work, but they too don't have what they need to be their best selves. So, and here's the video.
Scientist. And behind every PBS program is a viewer like you. Get behind your PBS station. Your support makes a difference.
Hello and welcome to Scientific American Frontiers. I'm LaWanda. We all like to think that we understand our own minds, that we carefully weigh the pros and cons when we make a decision, and that after we've made it, even if we have cause to regret it, we know why we decided the way we did. Oh, sure, we know some choices are more emotional than rational, but even then, we think we're conscious of all the conflicting arguments that run through our minds as we make a choice. Well, in this program, we'll find out how utterly deluded we are as we join in experiments revealing just how sneaky and underhanded our brains can be. I've always thought of myself as a feminist, so I'm pretty sure I know how I'll do in this test of my reaction to women in the workplace. I am ready to begin. Women, in fact, like Mazarin Banerjee, who's a professor here at Harvard University. The test is called the implicit association test, and it begins simply enough. I have to pair the word in the center with one of the words above by pressing the E key with my left hand or the I key with my right. Well, it could be either way. Mazarin has told me to do this as fast as I can because it's the time I take to make the associations that's critical to the test. Now the target words have changed, but the task remains the same: to quickly decide whether the new words belong to the left or the right. But things are about to get trickier.
It's the same thing, except now any one of these 4 will show up, and when it's career or male, you'll press the left key. When it's family or female, you'll press the right key.
Career or male?
Yes.
So now the categories are described by 2 words, making it harder to decide where the new words belong. Salary. But since historically male and career have gone together, this is like reinforcing the stereotype.
Yeah, this exactly.
The point of the test is to discover if lurking beneath my feminist convictions, I actually harbor a hidden bias against women in the workplace based on all the associations between man and career and women and family that bathed the culture I grew up in.
So now just
or male,
right.
career or female. Okay, now you're testing me here.
Yeah, we're testing.
The implicit association test is designed to ferret out any bias by seeing if it takes me fractionally longer to figure out where a word belongs when the pairing of the target words, in this case family and male together and career and female, is slightly more difficult for my brain to accept. Corporation, family, career, brother, management. You were done.
slight. I could tell he has a slight. This is very good. So let's see, you're showing a slight automatic association between male and career, and only 12% of the population that takes this test shows this bias. What you're seeing is that you're showing a much smaller bias than what many other people show. I'm up here. I make a strong association between male and career and female and family, even though that's not what I consciously express.
Even though that's not what you live.
And
right?
that's not what I live, but in my world. And I don't know. I'd be interested to know. Maybe many years of working in feminist causes made you show this less.
So all those years of working in feminist causes didn't manage to totally eliminate my lingering association between female and family and male and career. What's astonishing, though, is that Mazarin is far worse, and she's not only enjoying a very successful career, she designed the test. Another of its designers is Brian Nozick, who personally developed the test he's taking now, intended to reveal hidden racial prejudice. These are the same faces you've seen many, many times.
Many times. In fact, I helped create the faces. Right. So,
The heart of this test is to see whether it's easier for Brian to match words or pictures to the pairing of African American with bad and European American with good than when the pairings are reversed, European Americans with bad and African Americans with good.
I can predict.
yeah. What do you think?
Moderate.
I'd
Moderate
say,
to strong. But,
I'll say moderate as well.
yeah.
Strong preference for white.
You're taking this for the umpteenth time, and you still haven't caught on to the fact that you're a little biased.
I think part of that is the insistence that my conscious beliefs still matter. It isn't that the fact that I keep showing these implicit biases mean that I'm a biased person, so I should just accept that and move on. It's that, no, I don't agree with those. I do have them, and I will admit to having those implicit biases, but I'm not going to let that rule what I would consciously want to have.
It really is remarkable that here I am in Cambridge, Massachusetts, perhaps the liberal capital of the country, with two academics who pride themselves on their enlightened attitudes, only to discover that they have latent within them biases they would fervently deny if their own test hadn't revealed them. But all may not be lost.
We've found in research and also in testing of myself that if I put myself in a situation where I think about positive black exemplars, I think about Michael Jordan and Colin Powell and people, Martin Luther King, who have had a very positive impact and who are also African American, I show much less bias immediately after thinking about those exemplars than if I hadn't thought about them before.
Even simple things like the presence of an African American experimenter reduces race bias. That the presence of a competent woman makes women's attitudes to math become more positive. Those kinds of studies sit, I think, in contradiction to the ways in which people like I thought about these. We thought they were learned over long periods of time, that they were entrenched, they were rigid, inflexible, and that does not appear to be the case. And I think that that's where the room for optimism is. So on the one hand, I would like people to take these data seriously when we look and when we can show the vast numbers of people who show the bias. I think we need to contend with that. On the other hand, what this work is showing is that it might be not that hard to shape environments that can change these, even automatic kinds of attitudes. Yeah.
You can find out if you harbor unconscious biases you would deny even to yourself by logging onto the Project Implicit website. There you'll find tests of attitudes towards such things as age and religion, as well as lighter fare like the Harry Potter movies versus the Lord of the Rings. Give it a try. You may be in for a shock.
Behind every innovation is an inspired scientist.
When we know that there are implicit bias, we want you to think for just a moment, just brainstorm with your partner, how that implicit bias affects policies, our children's outcomes, hiring practices. Just take a few minutes and come up with your own list that if we are not aware, what do we see in our society? And while you do that, I'm going to switch back to the PowerPoint. more seconds. So thinking about your own conclusions, we want to tell you about something that really surprised us in our applicant pool. Now, we knew by looking around the rooms that we were in that, as I had mentioned earlier, most of the people that were in the higher decision policy-making arena were women who were white. When we designed this project, we were thinking, we'll have a diverse group, maybe, you know, in their 30s, because we did want them to have some experience. What we found was a diverse group, but some of the participants, the fellows, were in their 50s and 60s with doctorate degrees. And they had been passed over time and time again. Now, once we saw that, we went, well, of course, that absolutely matches what we know. What we didn't realize was how much that passion is within those fellows, that they are still not going to accept it. They still want to get ahead, and that they were willing to put in 18 months of Saturdays to really be lifted. And so LaWanda's going to talk about where they are today.
Yeah, where they are today is absolutely amazing. Some of them now definitely have remained in the classroom, but now they're champion social justice causes right there in their programs. And so what we've heard back from their supervisors is that they're stronger leaders now, and they're working side by side with their supervisors or some other folks in their school districts or at their respective agency. Others have gone on to be advocates, definitely change makers in that world, but then some have even received, finally, promotions because they're deeply seated, and they can say with confidence, hey, I feel like this isn't right. I would like to challenge the status quo. I would like to disrupt the institutional systems here that has kept me from promoting from within. We have one who is running for school board. Isn't that amazing? Yep, she's running for Berkeley School Board. We have a few of them have moved on to other positions, teaching at the community college in Alameda County. We have some working with mayors on special projects. I mean,
Like
we
the
cannot have
homeless?
on the homeless, working with a project supporting the issues around homelessness for those who are experiencing that. So some of our own, even going through that and seeing the growth of the fellows, Neva and I had our own growth. Not that we didn't expect it, but it was, we started to realize that we had our own blind spots. We realized there were some things we hadn't labeled or named. So going through the material and the content, preparing for each session, we started to also continue to learn and grow in this area. We both have moved on from our agencies, not because the agencies we were with we loved where we worked, but we also started wanting to do things at a more systems level and take on and lead that work. We also realized that some of the work that we wanted to take on was around trauma. I now do consulting work for an organization around trauma. Also looking at pre-K through third grade alignment, which is what Neva does as an early learning program manager at Alameda County Office of Ed. And now both of us are doing presentations and workshops like this, not only in our local community, not only statewide, but now nationwide. So we could have never thought of this, and I always say this to Neva in a presentation, and I say that with all humility every time, Neva, but I'm really proud that Neva applied for this fellowship, because we were able to design this fellowship as one of a kind in its country. And it's all because of the fellowship that Neva was able to apply for, get, and then use as a platform to create this work. So I'm always going to be grateful to you for this, and I'm grateful that we are able to bring it for you to think about designing in your own community.
And
yes,
let's face it, we are really a good team. So
Yeah.
LaWanda's background, her knowledge, her experience, her expertise, I feel like neither of us would have achieved what we did with the fellows if it wasn't for each other and our passion as well as the fellows' passion.
yeah. What we feel like the lessons that we're still starting to learn is that we have to meet people where they are. That's sometimes hard, because where they are, if you have a vision for where you can see them, it's hard. So that's another lesson that that we've learned. We have learned to slow down. I think we both have ADHD or something, but we are like, we're like go-getters, and sometimes we are, in our scrambling of things, there's things missed. But just learning to slow down to do this work because it requires all of that. Now we're doing a project. I'll let Neva describe the project that we're doing work around QRS and trying to get them to look at leadership as a part of the QRS system. That's, we'll see whether it's in the matrix or one day or somewhere in the continuous pathways for improvement. We've been able to present and work with the California Early Childhood Mentor Project, presenting this work to them and maybe some considerations of doing some partnership in the future. And then the nationwide now, Neva, you should explain that.
So we heard through the Build Foundation about a grant that was called the Hope Grant. And we applied. We thought, let's see if we can reproduce this. Well, we made it through the second round, and then while we were not granted a Hope Grant, they did recognize us for the value of our work, and we are now part of a community, National Community Mentors in Residence through the NOW program. So we're developing blogs, and we're developing a toolkit, and these will be shared resources that you will be able to access, as well as other people who are doing work around health and inequity. So you are welcome to go on to the NOW platform, and we can actually send out and add a link for you on how to access that. It's not on here yet, we just received it, so you'll be able to do that. But it's really turning our work and sharing resources from a regional and even a state level to a national level, and we're pretty excited about that opportunity.
Yeah, and then we're hoping to do a toolkit. So providing technical assistance and support, but wouldn't it be easier if there was a guide or a toolkit that was packaged that stepped you through the beginning to where we landed, and also leaving enough room so we make sure whoever picks up this toolkit can replicate it based on their community context. So that's what's really important, that not duplicate what we did, but then just contextualize it around where you see there's a leadership gap for emerging leaders in your community.
Great. So we do have a concluding inclusion activity. LaWanda's going to walk you through that.
Yes. So we have like 3 prompts here today. And the first one I like to do is invite you to think about the purpose of this conference. And it's my understanding this is the last day of your conference. So it's all about inclusion and it's all about equity. And so the very first question is, consider what you've learned today. You got to see a number of videos. You got to experience going through the application. Hopefully you capture some big ideas on your handout, concepts, goals, and strategies. But just really think about what is necessary, or what's one criteria you feel is necessary when you're considering your focus on equity and inclusion. And I'd just like to invite you just to write that down and capture it on your note sheet, and then I'll come back for the second prompt. But again, considering what you heard today, what are necessary criteria one would consider when focused on equity and inclusion?
So thinking about your own communities, thinking about where you see inequity, what comes to mind for you? What would be some specific targets that you would think about that you would need to have to help to begin to interrupt that? Questions about that question?
Yeah. I'm thinking about our friend who has a small school district. Like, what would this mean for you, for example?
You want us to write this?
Write it.
Chalk it out.
Right. Write it out. Okay, and then we'll move on to the next question. If you jotted down a few thoughts, specifically, what strategies might you take as a way to develop equitable practices in leadership? What are some strategies? If you were trying to do this and you wanted to, thinking about that graphic we saw earlier around equity, it's not about equality, it's about equity. What would you do to try to infuse that again back in your work context to make this come to fruition?
And think of yourselves, because you are leaders,
That's right.
So think
That's
of yourselves when we talk about that leadership.
Yeah.
Where's your voice and your influence?
Yeah, that's great. And then I'm going to move to the last question that really is a charge and to us, all of us in the room, including Neva and I. Knowing many teachers and administrators have experienced or contributed to systemic inequities with regards to promotion, leadership roles, and policies, how would you work to broach these subjects if asked? So someone comes up to you and say, hey, how would you take this on, thinking about, again, your work context, your community. And we get asked all the time, and sometimes we're stumped too. So it's always a good reflection question, like, how do we think about this? How do we, work with other thought leaders and thought partners to do this work? And this is for you, just write it out. Like, what would you begin to say?
What would be your elevator speech
Yeah.
almost? Or what are your bullet point highlights that you would say to help convey what you know to be true, the inequities that exist, and what you might do about it?
And let me say one example. I feel like there was a time where there was a teacher who was looking to move up, and this is not me, I'm well-meaning, right? And fantastic teacher. I'm like, no, I need her in the classroom because she could work with some of the more lively children that who were amazing but needed that support. But if she was to move up, that was taking a resource and an asset away from that classroom. So by the mere structure or my practice is really punishing her in a way for being an amazing teacher who was ready to move up. And I didn't do it because I don't think I did it because I had a bias, but did I? Like now I go back and think about that. Or systems that you have that if you don't do this, then you're not able to promote or you're not able to grow, because within our institution, if you didn't do these prerequisites, you can't apply for this particular position, for example. So I'm just trying to give some concrete examples about what that could look like. Okay, so hopefully you have some food for thought. And again, we wanted to make sure you walked away from here with some type of beginning action plan for implementation and provocation for thinking about this work when you go back to your respective communities. And so we're going to transition to Neva.
Okay, and so one of the things that we actually do not have time today to do with you, but you can do for your own agency or your own organization, is what we call a visioning activity. And we've done these in some of our longer presentations, and they become pretty powerful. What you would do is if you're leading a meeting, you can bring forth the content of your presentation, whatever it might be around, and in this case, we're thinking equity in whatever lens that you're looking. And after you've prepared and provided information and activities where you're discussing and learning from one another, you would have a stack of old magazines and you can create a vision board. And so some of the prompts might be something like thinking about equity and inclusion and action plans that you might develop. Create your own vision board on what it looks like. What is your end goal? What does it mean to lead for equity? What would be the reality for those people that you support? So in other words, if you had something that you developed and it was leveraged and it's making impact on others, what would that look like? And then you do it, you can do it individually and create your own, or what we've been doing is have tables create their own vision boards, and then they're working together and they're collaborating together and hearing each other's ideas, and then they share those out. Yeah. So it's, we found that to be pretty powerful. The participants really enjoy that. We've done this now at my own work on various different subject matters, but it really creates a grounding and a visioning and using that side of your brain that we may not always use to be creative and present. So just an idea that you are able to complete also. And then we do want to give you an opportunity if you have any questions or comments before we completely close out for today.
Yes. Any thoughts, takeaways, questions, lingerings?
Okay.
Yes, back here.
Oh.
Yes. That's a good one. Wow, yeah, go for it.
Well, one of the things is that what I have found in my fellowship, which is ending, so it's been about 3 years now, is that really having bravery to address it, taking risk, and really sort of that term of putting the elephant on the table. You can be really, you don't need to be rude in any way, but you could say something like, when this happened, so be very grounded in what you observed, here was my thoughts. And then ask questions like, can you think about how that might have affected others unintentionally? Mm-hmm. And then if they're stumped, because sometimes they are stumped, you can bring about some thoughts about, well, I wonder how they might have felt about da-da-da. If it was me, I might have felt this way. Mm-hmm. So that you're prompting, giving some thoughts about how you feel. But what I've really found is that, you know, some people say people aren't ready. Yeah. But you know what? We'll never be ready unless we begin to address it. So it's really that taking risks and being willing to surface that bias. There's a comment that probably some of you've known, and this is not a complete quote, but the idea is that if you are witnessing something that is inequitable and you stand by and say nothing, mm-hmm. then you are just as guilty as mm-hmm. the person completing mm-hmm. that, you know, implementing that inequity. So we have to really learn to be advocates. And again, it doesn't necessarily need to be confrontational. It should really be as a learning sort of guidance. Have you thought about this? Yeah. And then having tools to help them.
The other two things we did in our program to help address that is to just label it. Just straight up label it, identify it. Because once you name it and call it what it is, then we can start working from that. Whether there's discourse about, I disagree, I don't agree, you can start to label it and say, this is what I'm seeing in a respectful way. The other thing is to question and say, I wonder by this practice or these assumptions or by this policy, who's benefiting, who's in by this policy, who does this benefit? And then ask the second question, follow up, who's not? And literally, you can do an activity, you can chart it out, you can have that as just a organic conversation, but you naming it and then deconstructing the policy, the assumptions, and the biases helps. But you have to label it, even if someone pushes back and disagree.
So for instance, even in our application process, that just made me think about it.
Yes.
There was, because at that point, we both were working for a government agency, I still do, but for a government agency, there was this whole conversation about whether we could actually label for racial equity. And
On the
on the application. And we stuck strong and we showed data, and as you can see, it's on the application. So really pushing back in a polite way with data, but sometimes, you know, maybe being a little firmer than your natural way is a critical component as well.
Yeah, emerging leaders for racial equity was so strong, and they're like, you can't do that.
Right.
And it'd be a part of a government entity,
So we do want to show you a photo, and I'll try to make this larger so you can see it maybe. But these are our graduating fellows. You're not going to be able to see it. These are our graduating fellows, and it was, you know, a good, strong 18 months. We are still in communication with many of them. In fact, there are 3 that are working with us on a blog series that we're doing. So they're talking about the impact. We're talking about our project and the impact on us. They're talking about their projects, the fellowship and the impact on them. And then as we are transitioning out of this project and going into other ideas, we are able to share our next steps as well. So it's really, we're really excited about the future. And we're excited for them about their future as well.
Yeah, and another thing we didn't mention as we're closing with our final last activity is that we really also were thinking about succession planning and capacity building. So Neva, we have jokes inside jokes with each other. I said, I'm getting older. And she's like, I'm older than you. But, you know, we're both grandmothers. I raised 5 kids, single mom, moved from welfare to work, went into this field that I loved in early education. And now I see, like, I'm not going anywhere soon, but I do see me, like, slowing down. And, you know, it's just not the same. Yet I'm more passionate than ever. But then I start to honestly, I start to get worried, like, well, who's going to do this work now? Who's going to pick up the torch when sometimes they say we have a declining workforce and we still don't have racial equity fully addressed in this field? It's just like, what is a nice thing like this doing in the field of early education? That's one of the researchers, Gloria Lampton-Billings, who talks about race in early education. So who's going to do this work, and are we going to have the demographic of leaders to reflect the demographic of children and teachers that are in this field? So, do you want to do this?
Sure. So before, you have like 2 minutes.
2 minutes.
What we'd love to do in closing is just have you share with your neighbor one point of new knowledge that you heard today. And then how will you take action? What will you be taking with you? So take about a minute each. Just talk about what came out of this for you, what was powerful. And then if a couple of you want to report back out, that's fine. If you don't, you are free to move on your own. So thank you so much
Thank
for
you
today.
very
But do
much.
take that time, please.
Yes.
Sure. No.
Quite the contrary.
So they actually, pardon me?
No, I said like, kind of the same question. Was this like, did you receive like a grant of funding?
Yes.
Yes,
We can talk
yes,
about
go
that.
for it, Neva.
So the way that this took place is we did leverage some funding from our AB 212 funds, which I don't know if you're familiar with. It's a professional development fund. They, the fellows did not out of pocket pay for this opportunity, but they did pay $500 from these funds to be able to cover materials and
So they have to apply for that professional development piece and then take that and use it to, like, enroll.
So actually, they didn't have to do that. In the application and who we targeted for this particular pilot were teachers that are involved in with a state preschool that received that funding. What they did have to do, though, is make sure that this program and this project aligned with their broader agency's goals, such as leadership. And so they did have to apply, they did have to cover the fees, but no one paid out of pocket for those fees. And really what we found was that no one left the program. Not one person left. They all graduated. And part of that is sometimes we find that if something's free, you don't continue to come, right? The commitment. And yeah, so the mentors had to pay $250 for this 18-month period, and the teachers had to pay $500. The reason why the mentors were paying less originally was because they were coming half-time and they're providing their services. But this was not free, and we really looked at, we went back and forth on it, but we did go back to say, let's see what happens here. And their supervisors had to approve. So they signed on that they would support the fellows through this.
Yeah. Do we want to say how much it costs?
Well, we're out of time.
Oh,
but
we're out
sure,
of time.
it's on there. It's on the
there.
application.
Okay.
$250 and then $500. So
I mean, overall, if they wanted to do this.
so if you were going to do something like this, we had $30,000 budgeted, and we came way under. I think we ended up spending about $15,000, and that included books and materials and videotaping and quite a bit. So
yeah,
we leveraged funding.
We fed them well,
We got some
too.
First Five funding. Yeah, we fed them every time.
That was important.
So thank you. We
Thank
both want to
you.
thank you for being here today. We hope you'll go out and change the world. Thank you so much.